So, they told me my art needed to be more African. But the Africa they wanted, it was a story I didn't recognize. A story they could sell. It was a continent flattened into a caricature, a single narrative of either exotic beauty or tragic struggle. And standing there, in the heart of Paris, what I thought was the center of the art world, I had to make a choice: lose my soul, or lose my dream. What if everything you've been taught about success was designed to keep you from ever finding yourself? Before Paris, there was Dakar. My world was never quiet or still, it was a symphony of life, and my art was just my way of writing down the music. I didn't find my inspiration in silent, sterile galleries. I found it in the chaotic ballet of the Senegalese market, where the smell of ripe mangoes mixed with the salt of the Atlantic. It was in the kaleidoscope of fabrics on the women, each pattern telling a story of family and celebration. It was in the low, wise murmur of the elders sharing tales under a baobab tree, their faces like maps of a history I was born into. And that is where my art came from. The deep indigo of my mother's bubu, the fiery orange of a sunset over Gori Island, the complex, interlocking rhythms of Malak's music, made visible on a canvas. It was modern. It was evolving. It was mine. And it was Senegalese. The dream of Paris wasn't about escaping. I never wanted to leave Senegal behind, I wanted to carry it with me. I imagined my work hanging in those hallowed halls I'd only read about. I saw it as a bridge, a way to show a different side of my home. Not the one on the news, but the one I actually lived in. The one filled with laughter and ambition and technology and art that was constantly reinventing itself. So when I got that prestigious scholarship to the Paris Art School, it felt like a key. The one that would finally unlock that door. I was sure it was my destiny to walk right through it, to put my Dakar on the same stage as their Paris. Landing in Paris was like stepping into a painting I'd studied my whole life. The architecture literally carved the sky, the bridges over the Seine were just as romantic as the movies promised, and the light really was different. I was just in awe. For the first few weeks, I just walked the city in a daze, completely captivated by its grand, historic beauty. But a city isn't just its monuments, it's the spaces between people. And in those spaces, I started to feel this chill that had nothing to do with the European autumn. In Dakar, life is lived out loud, in community. Greetings are these elaborate rituals of connection, not just a quick nod on the street. You are someone's daughter, someone's neighbor, someone's friend. Your story is woven into this huge tapestry. In Paris, I felt like a single, loose thread. Conversations felt like transactions. The jokes that were so natural back home seemed to get lost in translation, earning these polite, confused smiles. And I wasn't just an artist anymore, I was an African artist. It was a label they applied with a heavy hand, a box I was supposed to neatly fit into. In class, my peers would talk about their work with this detached, intellectual irony that I just couldn't connect with. My art was emotional, born from spirit and soil and sound. Theirs felt like it was born from theory and critique. The loneliness was a quiet, creeping thing. It wasn't about loud aggressions, but all the silent moments of misunderstanding. You know, the well-meaning classmate asking if we had lions in our backyards. The assumption that my technical skill was surprisingly good. I was a curiosity, a vibrant splash of color on their muted palette. And they admired the vibrancy, but I'm not sure they ever tried to understand the light that made it. I was surrounded by millions of people, and I had never felt so profoundly alone. The moment everything just shattered came during a mid-semester critique. This was the big one, where our work was picked apart by a panel of instructors, including the legendary professor, Monsieur Dubois. This guy was a kingmaker. His opinion could launch a career. And I had poured my entire soul into my piece. It was a huge, abstract canvas I called Dakar Nude, a swirl of deep blues, electric pinks, and shimmering golds. I was trying to capture the feeling of the city's energy after dark. It was about the fusion of tradition and modernity, the sound of car horns and chorus, the pulse of a city that was ancient and brand new all at once. I explained what it meant, my voice shaking a little. I talked about my grandmother's stories being the foundation, the deep blues, and the city's relentless drive being the chaotic, vibrant splashes of color. When I finished, the room was dead silent. Then, Monsieur Dubois cleared his throat. "The technique is spirited," he started, and my heart just leaped. But then he kept going. "There is a raw, primitive energy here, which is compelling. However, you must understand your market, Mademoiselle Diop." He pointed to a screen at the front of the room. He started showing images. The first was a silhouette of an acacia tree against a sunset. The next, a portrait of a Samba woman with tribal paint on her cheeks. Another was a stark, almost brutalist wooden sculpture. "This," he said, waving his hand at the screen, "is the narrative that has power. It speaks of a timeless, understandable Africa. Struggle. Simplicity. A connection to the earth. Your piece," he gestured back to my canvas, "is confusing. Is it celebratory? Is it modern? The Western collector isn't looking for nuance from Africa. They are looking for an emotional truth they can recognize." I just stared at him. My blood ran cold. A timeless Africa. The images he showed were a fantasy, a stereotype frozen in time for them to consume. He wasn't seeing my art. He wasn't seeing me. He had taken my soul, my city, my home, and told me it wasn't the right kind of African. He told me that to succeed, I had to sell a version of myself that was a complete lie, a story they wrote for me. In that moment, the dream of Perez cuddled into a nightmare. It wasn't a stage for my voice, it was an auction block for my identity. The weeks after that were just grey. The famous Parisian light felt like it was mocking me, lighting up a city where I now felt completely invisible. I stopped going to the student cafes. I avoided the museums. All the art that had inspired me now just felt like proof of a world I would never really be a part of. I tried. I really did. I went back to my studio, stretched a new canvas. I bought tubes of ochre and burnt sienna. I sketched the shape of an acacia tree. But my hands felt like they belonged to someone else. The paint felt like mud. Every single brush stroke was a betrayal, a small act of violence against myself. My heart just wasn't in it. My art had always been my language, the truest way I could speak. And now, I was being asked to speak in a tongue that tasted like ash in my mouth. This fight was raging inside me. On one side, there was this immense pressure. The scholarship, my family's pride, this supposedly once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Giving up felt like an unimaginable failure. It meant going home with nothing but a broken dream. That was fear talking. That was survival. But on the other side was a deeper, more terrifying loss, losing myself. If I painted their Africa, what would be left of me? What would happen to my grandmother's stories, to the real, vibrant, complicated Dakar that I loved? I'd have a career built on erasing myself. I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the tired, hollowed-out person staring back. I was caught between two worlds, and it felt like I was failing in both of them. The decision didn't come in a flash of lightning. It came in the quiet of my small, cold studio, after weeks of just silence. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by all my failed attempts to be the artist they wanted me to be. I just felt this deep, bone-weary exhaustion. And in that exhaustion, something finally clicked. Their definition of success wasn't a pedestal, it was a cage. I could choose to stay in it and be fed, or I could choose to be free, even if it meant I might starve. I stood up. I took the canvas with the sad, half-finished acacia tree on it and turned its face to the wall. I took out a fresh, blank canvas. It was a terrifying, exhilarating sight. It was a new start. I didn't have a plan. I just had a feeling. I put on the Malak's music I had stopped listening to because it made me too homesick. I closed my eyes and didn't think about Paris, or galleries, or Monsieur Dubois. I thought of home. I thought of the organized chaos of my mother's kitchen. I thought of the exact shade of pink of the bougainvillea that climbed the walls of our family home. And I started to paint. For me. I painted with the colors that lived inside me. I painted the stories that were mine to tell. A piece emerged that was defiantly joyful, unapologetically complex, and so deeply Senegalese. It wasn't the Africa they wanted. It was my Dakar. And looking at it, for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. It might never hang in a Parisian gallery, but it was honest. And I realized that kind of authenticity. That was the only success that mattered. Looking back, it's so clear that I had to go to the West to truly find Africa. Not the continent on a map, but the one that lives inside of me. That whole experience didn't break me, it forged me. It forced me to answer the question, who are you when the world questions everything you are? I learned that success isn't about getting a gold star from institutions that were never built for you in the first place. Success is about defining your own terms. It's the ability to look at your work, at your life, and see an honest reflection of your soul. The painful truth is that the art world wasn't asking for my story, it was asking for a product. And my culture, my identity, it's not a product to be sold. I didn't have to choose between Africa and the West. I just had to choose myself. And in doing that, I found my own way to build that bridge. I started sharing my work online, telling the real stories behind the canvases. I wrote about my grandmother, the markets, the feeling of the Harmattan wind. And something incredible happened. A community found me. People from the diaspora, people who also felt caught between worlds, people who had been told their stories weren't enough. They didn't see a caricature. They saw themselves. This journey was mine, but I know this feeling is universal. That feeling of being misunderstood, of being put in a box. Have you ever felt like you had to choose between a version of you that was acceptable to others and your true self? Share your story in the comments below. I promise you, I read every single one. And if these are the kinds of conversations that matter to you, think about subscribing. We are building a space for real stories here. I came to Paris thinking I needed its approval to become a great artist. But the most important journey I took wasn't the thousands of miles from Dakar to France. It was the few inches from my head to my heart. My voice was never lost. It wasn't waiting for me in Paris. It was just waiting for me to listen. It was waiting for me to come home to myself.